Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be getting into the winged insects. This will be part 12, Order Ephemeroptera, of the Introduction to Insect Taxonomy. And as a reminder, we can look at what we talked about previously. We have already covered the entonates, which are the insectoid, insect-like creatures. Some of them used to be included with the insects. The entonatha, they have kind of pocket jaws. Their mouth parts are internal versus external, which is what most insects have. We went over the Archaeonatha and the Zygentoma, which are the first true insects. And these are apterous, so no wings. And they don't have no real metamorphosis. Metamorph. So they just continuously molt, they get bigger, they don't really grow wings, they're extremely ancient, kind of very simple insects. And after them we get into the Paleoptera, which are the ancient wings. And these are the insects which have wings, so these are the first winged insects. And they can't fold their wings, which is a defining feature of this group. Their wings just kind of stick out vertically over their body. So these are the Ephemeroptera, which is what we're going to talk about today. These are the mayflies. And then this group also includes the Odonata, which are the dragonflies and the damselflies. And then after that, we'll get into the Neoptera, which are insects with wings, which they can fold them up behind them, or they can fold them almost fan-like under their shells, or their elytra with the beetles, or their tegmina. Let's get into the Ephemeroptera. Some things that you should know about them compared to the Archaeonatha and the Zygentoma. Like I said, they have wings, which they can't fold. They are primarily aquatic. So the adults can fly, and they fly on land. But the nymphs, which are in some of the older literature called naiads, the immature stages, the nymphs, they spend their entire life in the water, specifically freshwater, and they can live in freshwater for years. So the average life cycle of these can be between a few weeks up to 2 or 3 years, and then the adults may only live for a few hours or a few days. All of the life cycle things other than mating are done by the nymphs. So this is where all the eating and the sleeping and the burrowing occurs, is with the nymphs. And then they emerge into adults, and they mate and die. That's all the adults do. They don't have mouth parts, so they can't eat. It's a very, very short period. Sometimes they will emerge in huge swarms. If you grew up around fresh water, you might be familiar with this. There are some species of mayflies that will emerge all year or emerge year after year. And then there are other mayflies that will kind of time their emergence, kind of like cicadas do, and they'll all emerge at once, and you'll have billions of these mayflies flying around for a day or 2 days, and then they will all die. And then you have to get out the snowplow to move all of these dead insects. So the mayflies are an ancient group of insects. This is an old plate. This is how scientific illustrations used to be done way back when. This is from 1900. They are very distinctive in how they look. So the nymphs, like I was talking about, are represented here and here and here and here. They have long bodies. Again, aquatic. They always have 3 tails. And the adults may have 2 or 3 tails. So here's 2, here's 3. But the nymphs always have 3 tails. The other defining characteristic of them is that they have 1 claw on each foot. And this helps distinguish them from the stoneflies, because stoneflies are also primarily aquatic, and they only have 2 tails and they have 2 claws. So if you're not entirely sure what you're looking at, you can count the claws and count the tails. They also, as they age, tend to have abdominal gills, and this is how they breathe and swim. Abdominal gills. Yeah, I can't spell today. So they have these abdominal gills. The gills may be in other places as well. Sometimes they're underneath the legs. They end up with these very fan-like tails, fan-like antennae. They're very pretty, generally. They tend to be fairly small. But it's the nymphs that tend to be easier to identify. They have a extremely variable morphology, whereas with the adults can still be identified sometimes, frequently only to family levels, and sometimes only the males can be identified, or sometimes only the females can be identified. But the nymphs can frequently be identified to species level because they do have quite a bit of unique morphology. And then in the adults, like I said, they can either have 3 tails or 2 tails. And then the wings, they almost always have 4 wings, but sometimes this hind wing will be reduced to nothing, or sometimes it'll be reduced to very, very small. So this is a fairly large hind wing, but sometimes this hind wing is itty bitty, and that will help you identify families. Generally speaking, you can identify a mayfly adult from very far away because it has a very distinct body posture and silhouette. So the wings, like I said, will always be vertical over the body, and they generally have fairly well-developed front legs, especially in the males, because the males use it to grasp the females during mating, and they will have these well-developed forelegs that stick out, and a relatively curved body with long tails, big wings stuck up over the body. From a long distance, you could be able to pick out that silhouette very, very easily and know that you're dealing with a mayfly. In the true adults, the wings will be pretty much always clear. Mayflies go through 2 adult stages, which is kind of interesting. The imago is the true adult, and then the subimago is the stage that comes before it. And the wings look different, and I'll show you that in a minute. But before we get into the life cycle, let's talk a little bit about how I've divided up talking about the Ephemeroptera. So Ephemeroptera, meaning ephemeral wing, because they don't live for very long. There are a lot of families of Ephemeroptera, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this, of how am I going to talk about just the variability of the Ephemeroptera, because I'm not a particular expert on Ephemeroptera. I think they're cool, but I have not collected a lot of them. I haven't spent a lot of time dealing with them. And looking into it, there's 40 plus families. There's like 3,200 species, and they are worldwide. But they're kind of a pain to talk about because there's a lot of argumentation over the higher order classifications and things like that. So how I've decided to do this this little course on this is I'm going to divide the Ephemeroptera into 2 videos. This first video, I'm going to be talking about generalizations, the life cycle, the suborders, how to tell the adults apart, how to tell the nymphs apart. And then next time, in the next video, I'm going to talk about specific families. I'm not going to talk about all 40 families because that's too much, but I will be talking about the larger of the families. Some of these families, of these 40 families, will only have 1 or 2 species in them. They're only found in very, very specific parts of the world, and they're just not worth spending a lot of time talking about. So we'll just talk about some of the larger families and their defining characteristics. But for the Ephemeroptera here, these are the suborders. These are not families. These are kind of a level or 2 above families, between order and family. And each of these suborders contains a collection of families that branch off of this. But they do have, in these suborders, they do have some shared characteristics, which is why I'm only talking about these 2. The Panota tend to have fused wing pads in the nymphs. So the characteristics of the suborders are partially defined or majorly defined by the nymphal characteristics, not the adult characteristics. In the Panota, they have fused wing pads in the mature nymph. So these are the nymphs that are about to emerge into the adult stage. They will have fused wing pads, as opposed to the Schistodonta, where the wing pads are less fused or partially free. Additionally, the Panota nymphs tend to be crawlers in that they are not good in the open water. They will be on the bottom of lakes or streams where they can crawl around and anchor themselves into the rocks so that they don't get washed away or the fish don't eat them. The Schistodonta, however, are good swimmers. They are also burrowers and clingers. meaning that they will cling to open rocks in rapidly moving water, so in rapids, or they will burrow underground in the water into the mud in order to be safe. So they do have this sort of trend into distinct lifestyles within the different suborders. So if you want to collect Panota, you're going to have to rummage around in the bottom rocks of a lake or stream, versus the Schistonota will be in other places as well. So this is what a mayfly looks like. This one, like I said, this adult has 2 tails. This is an imago, the true adult, because it has clear wings. There's no fringe on these wings. It's a much more brightly colored insect. When you talk about like a sub-imago, it'll look like this, where the wings are opaque. There's a little bit of fringe around the base of the wing. Their color is darker or paler. They don't have bright colors. Their coloration is muted. This will molt into another, this is a female, it will molt into another adult stage. This is the only insect group that does this. This is a very ancient group. It showed up in the Carboniferous period, which is like 350 million years ago. Lived through multiple extinction events. And they have a very weird life cycle. They're the only insects to have 2 winged adult stages. And that is definitely unique to them. And then they all, like I said, they also have this larval stage. So let me switch this to white so you can see it better. The larvae, like I've said before, always have 3 caudal filaments, the cerci. They also, the more mature ones tend to have these abdominal gills. They have a single claw on each foot. And then when I say the fused wing pads, these back here are the wing pads. This is where, when it emerges as an adult, these turn into the wings. So now that we've talked about that, we can talk about the actual life cycle, which is pretty neat. You have the nymphs, which are the primary life stage. So down here on the bottom, we'll start on the bottom. These are the nymphs. No black. Oh well. So these are the nymphs. Again, you have free wing pads here. They're not fused. The abdominal gills, the 3 caudal filaments, easily seen. These can be in the water for several years. These will emerge into, when it is time for them to emerge, they will make their way from the bottom of the lake or the bottom of the stream to the edges of the stream, or onto the plant, the vegetation growing out of the stream. They'll make their way onto plants, they'll crawl up, and then they will molt. And they will molt into the subimago. So here you can see, again, it's a very pale insect. The wings are partially opaque. They're not super brightly colored. They can fly, but they're not great at it in this stage, and they will rest and molt again into the adult stage, which is up here. So much more colorful, clear wings, better patterning. This is the true adult. And then the adults will mate in the few hours that they live. The males will swarm over the body of water, these huge swarms of millions of males. And the females will fly into the swarm, and the mating occurs basically instantly. And they will mate while they fly. And as soon as she's mated, she flies back down to the water, dips her abdomen in the water, and releases some eggs. And she does this over and over again. So the imago female will do this over and over again. Well, she will dip her abdomen, releasing eggs, and then she'll mate again if she needs to. Over here, this is from a research paper that I will link. So this is Cleon dipterum. So this is the male and female mating. The female is on top here, the male is on the bottom. The males have these enormous eyes that they use in those swarms to find the female. And then the female releases a number of eggs, which then emerge into itty-bitty nymphs or naiads, which will then find their niche in the stream or in the lake, and they will burrow in or cling to the rocks and live for several years. So One of the questions before we get into this is how do you tell the males from the females? So the question is, how do you tell the males from the females? So specifically with the adults. So occasionally with the nymphs, you can find sexual characteristics in the more mature nymphs, but it's just not as simple as it is with the adults. So I will also link this paper, Ectonura is a new micro-endemic mayfly species, because they have a bunch of really good pictures for how to tell the males and females apart. So the males, I can't really draw on this, but the males tend to have enormous eyes. Like I said before, they use these eyes for finding the females in the swarms. Sometimes they'll actually have a kind of a double pair of eyes, where there'll be a smaller eye on the bottom and then the enormous eye on top. And then on the end of the body, they have these claspers, these appendages that come off the back of the abdomen, and these are for clasping the female during mating. And they have that along with their caudofilaments. The female, however, if you look, has much smaller eyes because she doesn't need to find the males find her, and she doesn't have any claspers. The caudofilaments look like they've been torn off on this. And then if we zoom in, you can see what the filaments look like on the males from the top-down view. This is the dorsum. So you have well-developed claspers and then no claspers on the female. So, and then this would be the external male genitalia. That's what that is. So that is how you can tell the males and females apart. Frequently, you can just tell from the eyes. The males have these enormous bulbous eyes, and that will be how you immediately distinguish them in the field. So if you look at this picture, this is from that paper that showed the mating. The male has these enormous dual eyes. So he has an eye down here, and then he has what's it called? Terminal eye? I can't quite remember. Eye on top of the head. And this is how they spot the females in the swarms. So now that we know that, we can use this sort of general key that I found to talk about how to tell some of the larger families apart, just from what we've talked about here. If you need to know if there's 2 or 3 caudal filaments, and you need to know whether or not it has hind wings. Like I said, some of them have tiny hind wings, some of them don't have any. So if there are tiny hind wings and 2 caudal filaments, you know it's a beaded. If it's large, obvious hind wings and 3 caudal filaments, you know it's one of these 4 families. And then once you know, down here, this is for if you know that it's one of these 4 families, you can count the tarsal articulation segments in the feet. And we'll talk about this more next time, and that is how you narrow it down to what family you're dealing with. And if it's one of these 4 families, you need to look at the wings, and this will tell you what families you have. So this is mostly for next time. So next time we'll be talking about specific families in the Ephemeroptera. But until then, this is like a brief overview of the Ephemeroptera. If you would like to know more about the Ephemeroptera, one, I will link a bunch of things in the description, but also go find yourself some trout fishermen. They love the mayflies. They use them frequently, or they make like fly fishing lures that look like the Ephemeroptera. And a lot of trout farmers, or not trout farmers, trout fishermen will know a lot about the life cycles of the Ephemeroptera because they are necessary for catching trout. So until then, I will talk to you guys later when we discuss the families. See you later.